The Count is seen wearing white kid gloves and a straw hat, and he leaves around a brush for his clothes and a brush and a comb for his hair. But on many other levels he does not act like a nobleman at all. He lacks the typical aristocrat's high standard of living and conspicuous overindulgence. He does not eat or drink to excess, nor does he pursue as normally understood. His lifestyle does not revolve around fashionable clothes, the theatre, or hunting. He does not hold receptions or build stately homes. He actually chooses to live in a Gothic ruin. Not even his violent pastimes are undertaken purely for pleasure. Perhaps most unusual of all, for a thriving aristocrat, is the complete absence of servants. Dracula is not averse to performing all the necessary menial tasks, driving the caleche, preparing meals, and even making beds, to prevent Harker, his guest, from deducing that he employs no domestic staff. By way of character, Dracula is more than just a vague presence of malice. Stoker endows him with a recognizably human, if intensely evil personality. He has a mannerism of tugging his moustache during animated discourses on his family history, the only topic touched on in the book capable of making him pleasantly excitable. He does, however, exhibit a full range of other emotions, all of them used negatively: hate, passion, anger, disdain, baffled malignity, vanity. His mental gifts are largely borrowed from those of his namesake. The Count, like the voivode before him, has a mighty brain, is fearless, remorseless, a shrewd leader, and a cunning soldier, not averse to executing a strategic retreat in the face of disadvantageous odds, as the handbooks on guerrilla warfare dictate. Stoker plays down the tyrannical aspects of Dracula's pre-vampire life, for when speaking of his own past, the Count naturally does not see himself as the merciless psychopath, but as a stern, principled statesman. And Van Helsing concedes he was in life a most wonderful man, soldier, statesman, and alchemist. In this, of course, Dracula resembles Mephistopheles in Goethe's Faust, who, portrayed by Irving, left such a deep impression on Stoker. Overall, legal-minded Harker is so impressed by his host's great foresight and intellectual prowess that he utters the book's most memorable understatement. Dracula, if he chose, would have made a formidable solicitor. This intelligence and urbanity, while allowing Dracula to be firmly located within the tradition of the literary vampire, only partly accounts for all his pervading menace. He also exemplifies those characteristics notable in the vampire of folklore. In particular, Stoker is keen to highlight the animalistic quality of his master vampire, taking full advantage of the folkloric connection between vampires and werewolves. Besides having pointed ears and protruding canine teeth, Dracula possesses coarse, broad hands with squat fingers, as werewolves are frequently described as having. His palms, too, are hairy and the nails cut to a sharp point. His eyes glow red. The unalleviated stench which clings to his places of rest and which produces a feeling of nausea to those in proximity to him is the stench of excrement, of all the ills of mortality, of death, of arrested decay, augmented, when his thirst has been slaked by the sickly sweet acrid smell of blood. Even his persona is animalistic and irrational, childlike, instinctive. His vitality is shown as feral, and his cunning is that of an animal that resorts to swift physical action to counter any errors of judgment. Dracula enjoys an exaggerated gymnastic animal repertoire. He can climb face foremost down a castle wall, gripping the vertical surface with toes and fingers, though of course he does not fear death should he fall, being immune to the natural laws of mortality. These wall-descending activities are described as lizard-like. Later, Dracula's agility is expressed as panther-like. He has a snarl on his face and shows lion-like disdain. His general empathy with the animal world is demonstrated by his control over the lower forms of life, rats, bats, and wolves. In many other of his attributes and propensities, Dracula is a classical example of the vampire spoken of in European folklore. Being undead, his flesh is icy to the touch. He casts no reflection in the mirror, and when standing in front of flames, does not obstruct a view of them. He is unable to impose his presence on a victim at the time of first contact, unless the target shows complicity in some form. This is evident in Harker's stepping over the threshold at Castle Dracula, and in the Count's later visits to Lucy and Renfield. Dracula possesses enormous physical strength and speed of movement. His eyes can induce hypnotic effects, and with selective victims he is capable of psychic transfer. Dracula can direct the elements around him, such as creating a puff of wind. He can see in the dark and vaporize himself at will. He is able to change into a dog, wolf, or bat. He can dematerialize to be transported as mist, and he can take shape from phosphorescent specks riding on moonbeams, which can themselves weaken powers of resistance. He is restricted by the presence of running water, being unable to cross it except at the slack or flood of the tide, unless with manual assistance. He sleeps and wakes with the precision of clockwork, dawn and dusk being calculated to the second. While sleeping, Dracula appears to be dead, eyes open with no pulse or respiratory motion. All the while he is conscious of activity around him, although searching hands cannot wake him. Crucially, although Dracula can be repelled by garlic and other pagan safeguards, he is essentially a vampire of the Christian mode. In other words, he is a representative, client, manifestation of the devil. In London, he aptly assumes the alias Count de Ville, and must therefore be shown to be vulnerable to Christian icons and imagery. The crucifix, arch symbol of the Christian faith, makes him recoil and cower, and application of holy water can sterilize his place of rest. But Stoker was not content to restrict his vampire king within the parameters prescribed by folklore. Dracula would have to be special, both in his attributes and in his manner of becoming a vampire. In particular, there are several qualities about Dracula which differentiate him from more common varieties of his ilk. The first concerns Stoker's insistence that Dracula can sleep only in consecrated earth, in soil barren of holy memories. He cannot rest. This requirement would seem to possess neither folkloric nor historic antecedent. According to the superstition of Orthodox lands, the undead, if excommunicated, were reputedly unable to rest in hollowed soil. Stoker probably intends Dracula's sacrilege to heighten the reader's sense of outrage and blasphemy. It also makes the Count's lairs harder to locate, sleeping deceitfully as he is among God's true dead, and of course Vlad Tepes himself was buried in consecrated earth. Another example of Dracula's uniqueness as a vampire is his immunity to the rays of the sun. The vampire of superstition is the quintessential apparition of right, it being assumed that sunlight could pass through or harm sensitive tissue. Dracula, however, cannot be destroyed by direct sunlight, as film versions would have us believe. That would make him too vulnerable. Once he is strong and vigorous from the consumption of fresh blood, he is permitted in the book to wander the streets of London quite naturally. The only handicap is that his vampire powers become neutralized during the hours of daylight, when he reverts to all intents to being a mere mortal. He must therefore take care that at the moment of sunrise he is in the place and form that he wishes to be for the coming day. Otherwise he must await the precise moment of noon or sunset to effect the desired transference. Most important of all, Stoker could not allow his arch-fiend to have become a vampire originally by any of the numerous qualifying procedures, for they all imply falling victim in some manner. Count Dracula can be a victim of nobody and nothing. As he has become a vampire, it must be because he wanted to be one. He was neither bitten whilst alive by another undead, nor was he sentenced to a vampiric punishment for any of the appropriate transgressions. In his human life, Count Dracula was an alchemist and magician. He had studied the secrets of the black arts and other aspects of devilry through being a student at the Schoolmans, a mythical academy situated high in the Carpathian Mountains, overlooking the town of Sibyl, known in Saxon as Hermannstadt. The patron of the academy is the devil himself, who instructs on the dark secrets of nature. He provides an understanding of thunder and lightning, the language of animals and magical spells. Those who studied the causes of natural phenomena were assumed to be capable of mastering them. Legend has it that Scholomance would admit students 10 at a time. Upon acquisition of the devilish insight, 9 would return to their everyday lives, leaving the 10th to be taken up by the devil as group payment. He would be mounted on an Ismijo, a dragon, another merging of the devil, dragon association with Dracula, and recruited as the devil's aide-de-camp. Needless to say, Dracula was the 10th student, whose arcane wisdom is demonstrated by Stoker early in the novel, when the Count inspects mysterious blue flames appearing in the forest, which, according to folklore, conceal treasure and gold. Stoker was not content to leave Dracula's transition from man to vampire to the reader's imagination. At the instant of the Count's death, such were the resources of his brain that, together with the magical powers gleaned from the Scholomance, his mental faculties survived physical death. But not intact, he paid the price of having much of his memory faculty destroyed, and has to engage in the relearning process almost in the manner of an infant. Van Helsing, the guru of Dracula's adversaries, is an exponent of the scientific method of experimentation. He appreciates the Count's emerging mental powers because he, Van Helsing, also employs scientific method, reaching out to acquire knowledge slowly but surely, one step at a time. Van Helsing's fear is not only that Dracula has acquired immortality through forging a special yet undisclosed relationship with the devil, but also that he has centuries ahead of him to develop his intellect and his evil. In fact, Dracula undergoes a dramatic shift in power during the course of the novel. At the outset, he appears as a rather cautious, insular old man, not yet sure of the powers at his command. He is in the position, despite his longevity, of a fledgling bird about to leave his nest and fly for the first time. He has not yet employed the full range of his vampire powers, which are about to be unleashed. To reinforce Dracula's grasp of the black magic, Stoker invests the Count's native Transylvania with suitably mysterious rocks and waters. It is a land full of strangeness of the geologic and chemical world. There are deep caverns and fissures that reach none know whither. There have been volcanoes, some of whose openings still send out waters of strange properties, and gases that kill or make to vivify. Doubtless there is something magnetic or electric in some of these combinations of occult forces which work for physical life in a strange way. These gases are discovered at first hand by Van Helsing when he sniffs sulphurous fumes inside the chapel of Castle Dracula. Stoker's Transylvania, in other words, is not only a land beyond the forest, it is also a land beyond scientific understanding, a netherworld, where the known laws of nature are suspended. It is a fitting haunt for an agent of diabolism.